Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
I'm delighted to be joined by Nigel Dodds, the leader at Westminster of the DUP's MPs. We've just had the collapse of talks on resuming devolved government in Northern Ireland. Is it your view that the government actually should stop trying to rebuild an alliance that's obviously not going to be rebuilt in the short term and appoint ministers to take important decisions on, for example, the kind of investments you want to see in Northern Ireland and indeed set a budget for the province?
Well, we think efforts should continue to try to get devolution restored, but You're right, I think in the short term that's highly unlikely. I mean, for our part, we would go back into the executive tomorrow on the basis of the agreed programme for government. Sinn Féin walked out of the government, unfortunately, and have set a series of preconditions.
Well, let's come back to those talks in a second, but it's really about where we are now. Yeah. Is it time for some form of, I mean, it's a very emotive phrase, but is it time for some form of effectively direct rule again?
Northern Ireland's been without ministers for 13 months, and that clearly, you couldn't survive 13 days in Whitehall without ministers in charge, and that wouldn't be tolerated.
It is extraordinary that civil servants are basically
Yeah, and it's put the civil servants in a very, very difficult position and an unacceptable position. That has to come to an end. There needs to be a budget within the next fortnight.
Within a fortnight?
Yes, and there needs to be decisions taken in order to spend that money, not least the rollout of the money that was secured by the Democratic Unionist Party for all of
constitutionally, who can take those decisions on how the money is spent?
Well, the budget can be set here at Westminster, and clearly Parliament can authorise ministers to take whatever decisions are necessary for the good governance of the province. And this is something that affects everybody.
Is that what should happen? Is that what should happen?
That's clearly what should happen, and I confidently expect that it will happen.
And is that temporary direct rule?
Well, I think that what we want to do is to try to continue with efforts to get devolution up and running. We are a devolutionist party. We didn't walk away from the executive. We have not set preconditions. Others have. But I think it's intolerable to have a situation where everybody in Northern Ireland is affected by the lack of ministers. I met with a group of people lobbying on mental health issues, an issue close to my heart and important for my constituency, who are saying we don't have a minister to lobby. There are important decisions outstanding. Health waiting lists are getting longer. That cannot go on. It's the interest of everybody, nationalist, unionist, Protestant, Catholic, to have ministerial decisions taken in the interest of good governance of the province.
Now, famously, you are supporting Theresa May on the basis that she promised £1 billion of investment in Northern Ireland. In fact, on some measures, it's £1.5 billion of investment in Northern Ireland. Can any of that money be invested without this emergency budget and without, indeed, ministers making the decisions you want them to make?
Well, some people famously describe this £1 billion as the cost, but of course we secured national benefits in terms of senior citizens, benefits in terms of NATO commitments on national defence spending and all of that. So I think it's wrong just to characterise it as money. Money for Northern Ireland.
But there is money that you wanted for roads, for broadband, was welcomed in Northern Ireland. Has any of it been deployed yet? Can it be deployed without this emergency budget?
Some has been deployed in the context of health spending in the current financial year. It will be rolled out as part of the coming budget, and it can be spent out provided that Parliament gives authority to ministers to do that.
So it has to give authority. So I suppose the question I want to ask you is, if the government does not go down the track of giving ministers the authority to invest in broadband, to invest in these roads that you want, is your deal with the government off?
Well, I'm very confident that those decisions will be taken so that issue doesn't arise at all.
But it might arise because, the government is telling me that they don't want to instruct ministers to make the decisions you want them to make.
Nobody wants to go back to full-blown direct rule. Nobody wants to give up on devolution. But in the meantime, certain decisions have to be made in the best interest of all of the people of Northern Ireland, whether it's broadband, health spending, education spending and the like. Nobody would accept a situation anywhere else where you have a complete limbo, no budget, no decision making. Without prejudice to the restoration and efforts to get devolution back, you do need certain decisions taken.
Just to be clear on this, obviously Sinn Féin thinks you have way too much hold over this government because you are supporting Theresa May in power. This is an illustration of how much power you have. You are holding the government to ransom, aren't you?
No, well, I think advocating that there should be some ministerial decision-making and budget set is a common-sense position that everybody should want to adopt. We, remember, want to get back into the executive without any red lines or preconditions. And Sinn Féin, who complain about too much influence, well, they should take their seats in Westminster, and I think they might find that they would have more influence than they currently have. It's their decision.
Would you like them to take their seats in Westminster?
Well,
I'm not sure Theresa May
would. As a Democrat, they're elected to, and they should take their seats. And remember, they're trying to get into government in the Irish Republic. So, you know, it's hard to complain about the DUP at Westminster when they're trying to be part of the government in the Irish Republic.
Now, one of the things the Sinn Féin has also alleged is that the leadership of the DUP did agree to some kind of legislation entrenching the position of the Irish language in Northern Ireland, and that you could not sell that to your supporters and members, and that's why the negotiations collapsed.
No, even in terms of the text that was released by I don't know who released whatever it was clear that there was no agreement in even that text that was released. And we have been very, very clear that on the issue of the Irish language, what we want to see is a fair and balanced package. Yeah. We want to see something that...
So you're not against some kind of legislation?
We're already spending £190 million in the last 5 years on allowing people and people promoting the Irish language, educated in the Irish language, and all of that stuff. There's absolutely no difficulty about that. But what we cannot accept is the Sinn Féin demand that it should be imposed on people who don't want it, that there should be all sorts of regulations and all the rest of it that people recoil against. And remember, Sinn Féin over the years have weaponised and politicised the Irish language in a way that's deeply unfortunate. Their former press office said that every word spoken in Irish was another bullet fired in the freedom struggle for a sovereign Ireland. So it's that kind of approach to the Irish language and culture that has caused deep difficulty with many, many unions. But we're not against a common sense approach, a balanced approach, and the recognition and respect for all languages. But it's certainly not the case that the leadership of the DUP agreed to any kind of package on that. Arlene Foster made it very, very clear that there wasn't sufficient progress on that issue. It's unfortunate the talks have come to an end. We now need decisions taken on spending and on budgets.
How quickly do you think talks could resume?
I think it's very difficult to say at the current time. There's a lot of mistrust, there's a lot of bad blood, let's put it that way. It's not helped by the current context where you have had one Sinn Féin MP who's had to resign in recent weeks because of his mockery of the victims of IRA terror. We've had another Sinn Féin MP who has just named his constituency office after 2 terrorists. Now, you know, all of that kind of context is difficult. We need a reaching out process. We need Sinn Féin to get back to a situation where they're actually wanting to work with unionists rather than sort of insulting the victims of their terrorism.
We haven't got a lot of time. Now, there are some who have said that they feel the Good Friday Agreement has possibly passed its time and needs amending. What's your own view?
Well, I think there's been a lot of discussion in the context of Brexit, and some people are saying, you know, that are accusing some people of using, saying that they're using Brexit to undermine the Belfast Agreement. In fact, what is happening?
But what is your own view about the Belfast Agreement? Is it as good as it ever was, and should it be preserved?
Well, of course, the Belfast Agreement has already been amended by the St Andrews Agreement, and some of those people who were its strongest advocates, like the SDLP, have talked about removing some of the ugly scaffolding of the Belfast Agreement. But some people who are now using the excuse that because of the Northern Ireland open border situation, because of the need to avoid a hard border, because of the protection of the Belfast Agreement, that somehow this all demands certain things like membership of the Customs Union, that is totally misconceived. They're actually using the Belfast Agreement to advance their own version of Brexit, or indeed in some cases to actually thwart Brexit. The issue of Northern Ireland's border, we want an open border with the Irish Republic, but we're also very clear that there can be no border between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom, economically or politically. And I think in terms of a customs union, it is very, very clear from what's been said by even people who've made a report to the Constitutional Affairs Committee of the European Parliament, by the head of HMRC, by the government's own paper last August, that you do not require membership of the customs union to preserve a frictionless border.
But it would still make it a hell of a lot easier for you, though, wouldn't it?
Well, we already have currency differences. There's a different currency in Northern Ireland from the Irish Republic. There are different tax regimes, VAT regimes. The idea that somehow that this will provide such a massive barrier that it will not allow trade to continue is nonsense. It can be done. The solutions are out there. Some people don't want to look at those solutions because they're trying to force a political solution to keep the UK inside the customs union or using Northern Ireland in a way which is not conducive
Now,
to
fortunately, I'm being
good
told
peace in
we're almost
Northern
out of time. Lovely to see you as always, and
Good to
come
see
back
you,
soon. All the best.
He was the Northern Ireland Secretary at a crucial time in UK-Ireland relations, but late last year, James Brokenshire realised he had a health problem when he began coughing up blood whilst on a break with his family. Tests revealed a cancerous lesion on his lung, and at the start of the year, he announced his resignation from the Cabinet to undergo major surgery. Well, his operation was a success, and just a few short weeks after being discharged from hospital, he's returned to Parliament, and I'm delighted to say he's also joined us in the studio now. Welcome back to the programme,
Thank you
James.
very much, Sarah. Good to be back.
How are you feeling?
I'm feeling remarkably well, actually, very strong. First week back in Parliament, which was quite emotional, all the people coming up and giving you hugs. And, no, just, you know, it's interesting how something like this from across the Conservative Party, you might say unifying issue from Jacob Rees-Mogg, Nicky Morgan, all those sort of people coming up and welcoming you back, but also very firmly Labour MPs, SNP MPs, Lib Dems, real warmth. And it's, you know, a rarity, as we know at times, where some of the political debate is very intense, to have that sort of very warm reception. And so I was very moved.
You look remarkably vigorous. It's only, what, 6 weeks or something?
Yeah,
since you had your
it
operation?
is about 6 weeks, and the care and support that I received from the NHS was absolutely outstanding. I just could not fault the hospital treatment that I've received. And I suppose being disciplined about getting back, getting myself fit, forcing myself to do lots of exercise, do lots of walks, you know, having Kathy and my children, strong family support behind me as well. And it's just been amazing, the number of people who've just written in, emailed, just willing me on, wishing me on, whether they've supported my own party or not, but just wanting me to do well. So, yes, positive, the prognosis is good. You know, I think I was lucky that I was able to pick it up early enough. But it has, I think, sort of underlined to me a number of issues about lung cancer, as I had you know, a small cancerous tumour, where there is some stigma around this. About 15% of cases of lung cancer, you know, no link to smoking. And I think people try and form some judgments that somehow it's someone's fault. People shouldn't do that at all about cancer. And it is about early intervention, about picking this up early, following it through. And there were many moments where I could have just said, do you know what, too busy, can't actually do this. But following that through, getting the treatment that I needed, well, you know, I'm so delighted to be here. I'm feeling as strong as I am.
You were having these tests at a fairly crucial time in the Brexit negotiations. You were Northern Ireland Secretary, and at the very point when the Prime Minister was having to put together a deal acceptable to both the EU and to the DUP about what was going to happen to prevent a hard border across Ireland. That was at the end of last year when you were still Northern Ireland Secretary. I'm sure you have kept up with this, even though you're now on the back benches. We've been talking all throughout the programme about the possibility of a customs union with the EU. Is it necessary to have one in order to avoid a hard border across the island of Ireland?
Well, the last time I was here, we were touching on that very issue and the first phase negotiations that had concluded there. And in essence, the three elements that we look at. In essence, the negotiations on the trade arrangement with the EU, if that does not provide the solutions around the border, then specific proposals that the UK government would then make, and then this backstop of alignment to deal with the north-south issues. So, you know, people are focused on this.
But that was a really remarkable thing, though, wasn't it? Because you've promised full alignment with the rules of the internal market and the customs union, basically keeping, in essence, the UK in the single market and the customs union if some other solution hasn't been found.
But I think it's also looking at the equivalence issues about how you can create the same outcomes without having full alignment. And I think that's important because this whole debate around the customs union actually comes down to, well, what is our future relationship with the EU? Do we need, as I believe that we do, to be able to negotiate agreements externally? Do we ensure that we are not simply a rule taker, that we just are bound by the rules, and almost that we voted to leave the EU, but we're now in an even worse situation as those who voted out would see it, of actually now being subject to everything, but without a say at all. And I just don't see that as tenable, which is why
But yet
I think
that is exactly the situation we'd find ourselves in if another solution to the Irish border isn't found, isn't it? That's exactly what the Prime Minister signed up to, was that full alignment with the single market and the customs union, unless there's some other agreement, which we haven't seen emerge yet.
Well, I believe that we can agree with the EU this free trade agreement that deals with goods and services, because it's the services element that is really crucial to this as well, whilst also ensuring that, yes, we don't have that hard border emerging on the island of Ireland with everything that goes with it. And the regulatory issues, yes, there are differences that already exist between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, particularly around some of the animal health, animal welfare issues. So I think there's experience that we can point to, and actually how there is a way forward as to how we negotiate this in the weeks ahead to get that right outcome.
It needs to be sorted pretty soon, though, doesn't it? Because Michel Barnier wants an agreement about the Irish border before we move on to talking about the future trade relationship.
But the issue on the first phase is that it is this sort of tiered basis of approach that we take. How it is about the broader issues first, and how I believe that we can negotiate an outcome that deals with the very sensitive issues of the Good Friday Agreement, the Belfast Agreement, and also the broader issues on North-South cooperation on the island of Ireland. So actually, it is about going back to those first phase negotiations, following that through, and getting the right outcome for the island of Ireland, for Northern Ireland, and the United Kingdom as a whole.
Some of your colleagues, though, who want to make out that the Irish border is something of a side issue that we shouldn't get too worried about, say things like the Good Friday Agreement is out of date. You must be worried when you hear them saying things like that.
When I returned,
you understand how sensitive
when I
this
returned
is.
to Parliament and made my first intervention this week, I was very, very clear on how the Belfast Agreement, the Good Friday Agreement, underpins the situation, the whole freedoms, the whole arrangements on the island of Ireland, how that remains as relevant now as it has ever done. But I think there are, I know some people have picked up on, well, does this define Brexit? I think actually there is a ground of real commonality on realising just how important this is, how, yes, over time, it may be that there are certain issues in slower time, once we get devolved government back up and running, that you could review, that you could look at this in a sensible fashion. And there are certain things that perhaps that people have pointed to on mandatory coalitions of devolved government in Northern Ireland, question whether that's still the right way forward. But that's a separate issue. That's in slower time. And I think the Good Friday, the Belfast Agreement, continues to underpin and needs to define how we look to the future.
Well, James Brokeny, sir, stay with us.
Sure.
We want to carry on talking to you, but we'll bring in some of the rest of the panel. I mean, Ian, as you see it, is essentially the question of the border with Ireland always going to underline the Brexit talks and always be a problem? It's very difficult for hard Brexiteers who want nothing to do with the customs union to get around.
Well, it will always be a problem until there's a solution. But I think, like James, I think, look, the Irish government doesn't want a border, the British government doesn't want a border, the European Union doesn't want a border. So you've got everybody trying to go to the same point. Now, Leo Varadkar made a speech last September, I think it was, in Belfast, you were probably there, James, where he suggested that there should be a customs arrangement between Britain and the European Union, and between Britain and the Republic of Ireland. Now, he suggested that himself, and yet from the talks that he's giving at the moment, you'd think he'd never said that. So I don't know what form that would take, but surely if you've got all three parties to these agreements wanting the same outcome, there ought to be a way of doing this.
But a lot of other things Leo Varadkar and the other people in the EU have said would appear that the means by getting to the common outcome, they're on very different places about that.
It's all about the means. The end is easy. Everybody agrees with that. It's like with the war in Iraq. Everybody agreed they wanted peace in the Middle East. How the hell do you get there? And so the fact that they all agree on the end is not, I think, that significant. And indeed, the first phase negotiation, which you were nobly involved with undergoing tests and so on, reminds me of that first UN resolution in the build-up to the war in Iraq. Everyone could sign up to it because it meant different things to different people. And this is the problem. As you know, the Irish government viewed it differently to the British government, who viewed it differently from the rest of the EU. Now we come to the crunch, and I can see no way forward beyond some continued membership of the customs union. You can't have a separate arrangement for Northern Ireland. The DUP wouldn't buy it for a start. And I gather that's one of the main reasons why Jeremy Corbyn, who's a sceptic about all of this, is signing up to it, because he sees now this is the only way of keeping the open border.
Now, talking of Jeremy Corbyn, the one other story we haven't touched on this week, Kate, is a story that's been running all week about Corbyn's contacts with a supposed Czech agent. It was interesting. I mean, the way it's played out, he attacked the newspapers for running these stories, really strong attacks from some Tory MPs against him, which look now as though they may have rebounded a wee bit.
Well, I think the thing, looking back over this week, that's become really clear, that's come out of this Jeremy Corbyn question, is that Labour know exactly what they're doing when it comes to social media, and that the Conservatives still probably don't. And if you look at the way Jeremy Corbyn handled this issue, he made his own video and he put it out on YouTube and he put it out on Twitter, and it got thousands and thousands and thousands of hits, and that was his rebuttal. And he didn't need to speak to newspapers, and he didn't think he needs to speak to television to do it. And so that allows him free rein to attack a story like this, where actually Jeremy Corbyn does have some real questions to answer. Whether you think it's right or wrong, or whether you think it's right or wrong that he was giving state secrets, he still met this person, and that's a question that he has to answer. Now, Bren Bradley's obviously had to apologise for the tweet that he made. And I do think one point about this that we should all kind of take away is that his apology has been retweeted and is now an attack line. It's quite vicious and vindictive, and actually I think people need to be a bit kinder to each other, and, you know...
I mean, of course, the thing is, there was absolutely no evidence that he was selling state secrets, that he even knew any state secrets to give away for free, and which is why you have this sense that actually the Tories maybe went a little bit too far in describing him as a traitor, saying he'd betrayed the country, and they were the ones who came out
Hang on a minute,
with
because it was one MP that got taken to task for that. He's now been forced to apologise.
The Defence Secretary said he'd betrayed his country.
Yeah, but you're saying that the whole Tory party did that. Yes, there were attacks on Jeremy Corbyn, and there still are in the media. The Sunday Times today, I think, has got a 2-page spread on it. So, but the thing is that politicians of a certain age have got to realise that anybody under the age of, I don't know, 40 just discounts this sort of thing. It's like in the general election, all the Hezbollah, Hamas, IRA stuff had no effect on people under the age of 40.
We'll have to leave it there. All right, to all of my guests and to you, Mr. James Brokenshire, thanks for coming in.